Part 1, The Last Tune by the Lake. In the shadow of a misty forest where no one dared to venture after dusk, a single haunting melody echoed every night. Played not by a flute, but by the distant hoot of an owl. No one heard it but her. And no one believed it carried the voice of her dead brother. The small English village of Dunsmuir hadn't changed much in the last 100 years. Nestled between moss-covered hills and a dense pine-wood forest, it was the kind of place where folklore wasn't just history. It was memory. People still spoke in hushed tones about the Black River curse, the singing stones, and the owls that watched but never flew. 12-year-old Elsie Morel used to laugh at those stories until her twin brother, Jamie, drowned in Black River on a still August afternoon. They had only been feet apart. One moment, he was standing on the old wooden dock, flute in hand. The next, he vanished beneath the surface, swallowed by silence. He never cried out. There were no ripples, no struggle, just the sudden stillness that changed everything. After the funeral, Elsie stopped speaking. Doctors called it selective mutism from trauma. Her parents moved through their grief differently. Her mother numbed herself with routine, her father buried himself in work. But Elsie withdrew into herself like a closing flower. Her only escape was the forest, where Jamie and she used to play, chasing echoes and pretending the owls spoke riddles. One evening, as fog crept across the heather fields and dusk dyed the trees silver, Elsie heard it, a low, mournful hoot echoing from the direction of the lake. Not just any owl call. It was the exact notes of Jamie's favorite tune. She stopped in her tracks. Her breath caught. The forest stood still. The melody repeated. 5 haunting notes, just like the opening of Jamie's song on his carved ashwood flute. He had played it every night before bed, claiming it was an old tune passed down from the owls themselves. But this time, it wasn't a flute. That night, she dreamed of Jamie standing at the edge of the lake, whispering something she couldn't hear, his mouth moving as an owl circled above them. When she woke, her pillow was damp with tears, and the melody still echoed in her ears. Over the next week, the hooting returned. Always just before midnight, always the same 5 notes. And no matter where Elsie was in the forest, she could hear it. Sometimes close, sometimes far, but always calling. No one else could. She tried to play the tune for her parents on Jamie's old flute. They smiled weakly and patted her head. But she wasn't playing for them. She was trying to reply. On the 7th night, she followed the sound. With Jamie's scarf around her neck and the flute tucked in her coat, she crept into the woods under the full moon. Branches snapped under her boots. The deeper she went, the louder the melody grew. Her heart pounded. Not from fear, but familiarity. Then she saw it. Perched on a broken oak stump was the largest owl she had ever seen. Its feathers were mottled white and gray, its eyes like molten silver. When it saw her, it didn't fly. It just hooted. The same 5 notes. Elsie raised the flute with trembling fingers. She blew softly. And echoed the tune. The owl tilted its head. Then, as if satisfied, it turned and flew. She followed. They walked for nearly an hour, over creeks, through thickets, under arches of thorn and moss. Finally, the owl landed beside an ancient tree, half dead, hollowed by time and fire. Its trunk was carved with symbols. Runes maybe, or just cracks from age. But one symbol glowed faintly in the moonlight. A spiral with 2 mirrored dots. Twins. Elsie stepped forward. Her breath turned cold. Inside the hollow, nestled in dry leaves, was Jamie's flute. But she had buried it with him. And on the wood were fresh fingerprints. Part 2, The Tree with the Twin Heart. The forest had never been silent like this. Not even at midnight. Elsie stood frozen before the ancient, hollowed tree, its bark creaking as if it breathed. The silver-eyed owl remained perched silently above her, feathers ruffling in the breeze. Its eyes didn't blink. They simply watched. Watched her. Watched what she would do. She reached into the hollow. The flute was unmistakably Jamie's. The grain of ashwood, The little nick near the base where he once dropped it on a stone step, the way the mouthpiece still smelled faintly of cedar oil. But how could it be here? She had watched them lower it into his coffin. She remembered her mother placing it gently over Jamie's hands before the lid closed. So how? She turned the flute over in her palm, and saw something that hadn't been there before. A carving. Faint. Fresh. Just above the finger holes. Follow the spiral. She stared at the words until they blurred. Her heart thudded against her ribs. Her hands began to shake. And then she heard it again. Hua hua, hoo hoo hoo. The melody. But now, with an extra note. Deeper, more urgent. She looked up. The owl had flown to a new perch, halfway up the nearby ridge. It hooted again. Elsie wiped her tears, gripped the flute, and followed. The path the owl took wasn't one she knew, not even from the old maps Jamie used to draw of the forest trails. The trees became denser, more gnarled, as if untouched by man for centuries. Moss clung to the roots like velvet skin, and glowing mushrooms blinked softly at the base of trees like sleepy eyes. It felt different here, older, watching. As she walked, Elsie felt the air shift. Her breath made small clouds now, though it was still early autumn. Her boots sunk into soft earth, and the wind seemed to whisper behind her. Follow the spiral. She reached the top of the ridge and gasped. Below was a perfectly circular clearing, surrounded by birch trees whose trunks twisted in an uncanny spiral. In the center, half buried under dirt and leaves, stood a stone structure. Small, domed, and cracked with age. It looked like an old well or a forgotten shrine. The owl landed silently on the rim of the stone. Elsie stepped down the slope carefully, her eyes never leaving it. When she reached the stone circle, she felt it instantly. A pulse beneath her feet. Like a heartbeat deep underground. Jamie used to talk about Earth's memory, how the ground remembers pain and joy. He believed some trees could hold emotions for 100 years. He used to press his hand against old stones and pretend he could hear whispers. Tonight, Elsie didn't have to pretend. She felt it. She crouched beside the stone and ran her fingers across the surface. More carvings. The same spiral she saw on the tree. And words. Old, faded, but still legible. For those who hear what the world forgets. She looked up at the owl. Who are you? She whispered. Though her voice was still trapped inside her mind. Her lips barely moved. The owl blinked slowly. Then it opened its wings. And hooted again. This time, the melody was followed by a strange shimmer in the air. A ripple. As if the forest was breathing in time with the tune. And then she heard Jamie's voice. Elsie. She spun around. No one was there. Elsie, you found it. The voice was inside her. Not echoing. Not imagined. It was him. Not like the dreams. Not distant. Real. And so painfully familiar it nearly dropped her to her knees. She pressed the flute to her lips and blew, matching the melody as best as her trembling hands could manage. The moment the tune ended, the earth beneath her glowed faintly. The moss shimmered. And from beneath the stones at her feet, a small wooden box pushed upward through the soil. Like a seed sprouting in reverse. She knelt, hands shaking, and opened it. Inside was a photo. A black and white picture of two children who weren't her and Jamie, but looked just like them. Twins. In the same clearing. With an owl perched between them. And beneath the photo, another flute. Older. Cracked. But almost identical to Jamie's. Carved into it, barely visible in the dim light, were the words. The first melody never ends. You just have to keep listening. Suddenly, the air grew still. The owl let out a sharp screech and flew straight upward into the canopy, disappearing. And then the forest answered. From every direction, owls began hooting. Not randomly. In harmony. The same 5-note melody. Overlapping. Layered. As if every owl in the woods had heard her song and replied. Elsie looked around in wonder, heart pounding with terror and awe. Then a gust of wind blew across the clearing, strong and icy. The photo flew from her hand and landed face down. She picked it up and turned it over. There, in a child's handwriting. They hear us. They remember. That night, Elsie didn't go home. She sat in the clearing, wrapped in Jamie's scarf, clutching both flutes, listening to the owl choir echo through the trees. For the first time since his death, she didn't feel alone. But even as warmth filled her chest, something else stirred at the edge of the forest. A shadow watching. Waiting. Part 3. The shadow that knows her name. The wind had calmed. The clearing had gone silent. And the owls were gone. Elsie clutched the two flutes close to her chest. One new and living with memory, the other ancient and cracked but humming with something older. The photo of the twin children rested on her lap, the back still marked by the words. They hear us. They remember. She should have been cold. The forest at night in early October was no friend to warmth. But some strange warmth still pulsed through the ground beneath her, just as it had when she first arrived. The stone shrine, the spiraling birch trees, the messages, it was as if the forest had been waiting for her. She leaned back against the curved stone and closed her eyes. And that's when she felt it. A presence. Not the soft whisper of memory. Not Jamie's comforting voice. Something else. She opened her eyes slowly. Across the clearing. Just beyond the ring of birch trees something moved. Not fast. Not clumsy. It didn't rustle leaves or break twigs. It simply appeared. A shape tall and thin, too still to be natural. It stood half hidden behind one of the trees. Watching her. Not blinking. Not breathing. At first, her mind tried to convince her it was just a tree trunk bent oddly by time. But then the shape tilted its head. Just like the owl. Elsie scrambled to her feet, flutes tucked under one arm. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. Her voice still lived in the shadows of her grief. She took one step back. The shape took one step forward. She turned to run. But her foot caught on a root and she fell hard, her knees hitting moss and stone. The cracked flute slipped from her grip and rolled toward the stone shrine. And then something unbelievable happened. The owl returned. With a sudden gust, it swooped down silently from the treetops and landed between her and the shadow. Its wings spread wide, blocking her from the shape beyond. The owl didn't hoot this time. It stared directly at the figure behind the trees. And screeched. A sound sharp and ancient, not like a bird but like a warning. Like steel scraping stone. The shadow flinched. And then, it vanished. Not into the woods. Not behind the tree. It simply dissolved. Like smoke in reverse, curling inward until nothing remained. Elsie lay frozen. Her breath shallow. Her heart hammering like a trapped bird. The owl turned to her, eyes glowing silver in the dark, and hooted once. A single note. Then it flew to the top of the shrine. And waited. Elsie slowly gathered the two flutes. She turned the older one over in her hand again. Something felt different now. A new line had appeared. So faint it could only be seen under moonlight. If you play it, the forest will answer. But beware what else listens. She swallowed hard. Was the shadow drawn by her music? Or by her presence? The image of it tilting its head, mimicking the owl, burned into her memory. It hadn't come to scare her. It had come because it knew her. Because it knew Jamie. Somehow, she made her way home before dawn. She slipped in through the back door, her muddy boots quiet on the floorboards. Her parents hadn't noticed she was gone. Again. Her mother's pill bottles sat lined like little soldiers on the counter. Her father's work bag still leaned against the door. The silence in the house was normal now. Elsie crept upstairs and into her room. She placed both flutes gently beneath her pillow and curled up under her blanket, trembling. Sleep didn't come. Only thoughts. The next day at school, she sat quietly as usual. Kids whispered around her. Teachers gave her sympathetic looks. She hated the way people treated her now. Like she was broken glass no one wanted to sweep up. During art class, she drew the tree with the spiral trunk, the shrine, the twin flutes, the owl. And in the corner of the page, without realizing it, she drew the shadow. Long head tilted. Just watching. Her teacher noticed. Elsie, she said softly, that's a lovely owl. But, what's this figure here? Elsie didn't answer. But her hand slowly reached into her backpack, pulled out Jamie's flute, and gently placed it on the desk. The teacher blinked. That's beautiful. Did you make it? Elsie looked up. Her first eye contact in weeks. She shook her head. It belonged to someone who still speaks to me. That night, the melody returned. Stronger. Louder. But not from the forest. From inside the house. From downstairs. Elsie bolted upright in bed. Her pillow fell to the floor. She clutched both flutes and tiptoed out into the hallway. Downstairs, the living room was dark. But from the old radio by the fireplace, Jamie's melody played. Note for note. Not recorded. Not from the radio station. Played. Live. Someone was playing the flute. Her legs went cold. She stepped down the stairs, each creak of the wood echoing louder than it should. The melody stopped. She reached the bottom of the stairs, and the radio shut off on its own. Silence. Until the creak of the back door. She turned. The door slowly opened. Though no one stood there. Just the wind. And beyond the threshold, perched on the garden gate, was the silver-eyed owl. It hooted once. Then flew into the dark. Elsie stepped outside. The garden was lit by the moon, shadows stretched long and strange. On the ground, by the bird bath, lay a small strip of cloth. She picked it up. Jamie's handkerchief. The one buried with him. Still damp. Still warm. Part 4. The melody beneath the floorboards. By morning, the handkerchief had vanished. Elsie had clutched it to her chest all night, curled up on her side with both flutes under her pillow, afraid that if she slept, everything would disappear. The owl, the melody, the strange warmth in the air. But when she woke, the flutes were still there. The handkerchief was not. She searched every corner of her bed, beneath it, under the blankets, inside the pillowcase. Gone. Had it been another dream? Her dreams lately felt too vivid to trust. Sometimes Jamie spoke to her. Sometimes she saw the spiral tree etched in fire. Sometimes she saw the shadow in the clearing again, watching from a distance. But never approaching. Yet even in the confusion, she knew one thing. She hadn't imagined the melody. Later that morning, as soft rain pattered against the windows, Elsie stayed home from school. Her parents didn't argue this time. Her father offered a weak nod. Her mother silently handed her a bowl of porridge she didn't touch. By mid-morning, the house fell quiet. Her father left for work. Her mother napped with her robe still on, a paperback slipping from her lap. Elsie sat on the floor in Jamie's old room. Untouched since the funeral. The curtains were still forest green. His shelves lined with fossils, feathers, notebooks of bird sketches. His boots still sat by the radiator, one half unlaced. But it was the floorboards that pulled her attention now. She remembered something Jamie once said, just weeks before he died. There's a space under the floor that echoes when you play music over it. Like it's breathing. I think something's buried there. At the time, she'd laughed. Now she wasn't so sure. She knelt and ran her hands across the wooden planks, pressing her ear to them. Nothing at first. Just the faint hum of the rain. But then she heard it. A thud. Soft. Dull. Like something shifting beneath the boards. She jerked her head back and stared at the floor. Was it an old pipe? A settling noise? Or a melody? 3 notes. Low. Muffled. As if someone were playing a flute through walls of dirt. She scrambled to the desk and grabbed Jamie's sketchbook, flipping past pages of owl feathers and tree maps. Toward the back, she found a page titled, Where the Music Hides. It was a drawing of the room's floor. A spiral symbol marked one specific board. Elsie looked up. There it was just under the windowsill. With a screwdriver from the kitchen drawer, she gently pried up the edge. The wood creaked and groaned, dry and old. The board came loose. Beneath it dust. Cobwebs. And something else. A small wooden box. Her breath caught. She reached in and pulled it out, brushing off years of grime. It was painted a deep forest green, with a silver latch rusted shut. She pushed gently. It popped open with a click. Inside, a silver whistle. A bundle of dried owl feathers tied with black thread. A slip of parchment, yellowed and folded tight. A torn photograph of a different girl, standing beside an owl perched on her shoulder. She unfolded the parchment. To speak with the silent, one must first become still. To hear the dead, you must first listen to the living world. Beneath the writing was a symbol. A double spiral intersecting a crescent moon. She didn't recognize it, but she knew what it meant. Jamie had found something before he died. Something ancient. Something real. That night, she waited until her mother had fallen asleep on the sofa again, the TV flickering soft blue across the dark room. Then, with both flutes in her coat pocket and the box tucked under her arm, she crept out into the rain. The owl met her at the gate. It didn't hoot this time. Just turned and flew, slow and low through the trees. She followed. They didn't go to the spiral clearing tonight. Instead, the owl led her along the riverbank, past the place where Jamie had vanished. Where the dock still stood. Rotting. Creaking. Empty. She stopped at the edge of it. The owl perched on a nearby branch and let out a single note. Elsie took Jamie's flute from her pocket and played the same. The dock shuddered beneath her. And then the water parted. Only for a moment. A ripple formed like a ring, widening. And beneath the surface, something moved. A light. Not bright. Not terrifying. Soft. Golden. Like a lantern far below. It hovered. And then began to rise. The owl screeched again. Sharp, commanding. Elsie stepped back. The water bubbled. Just a little. And then, floating to the surface. Jamie's bracelet. She remembered it instantly. A leather band with a carved owl on it. He never took it off. She reached down and lifted it gently from the water. Still warm. Still dry, as if it had never been lost. Suddenly, the air turned colder. Leaves shivered on the trees. The owl hissed. And from the shadows across the river, the shape returned. The same tall, tilting figure. Only now it moved. Slowly. Deliberately. Its feet made no sound, but every step made the trees sway slightly, like it carried wind with it. Elsie backed away. The owl flapped above her, circling protectively. Then the figure stopped at the far edge of the river, and raised one hand. A single finger. Pointing. To her. Elsie clutched the bracelet. The flutes. The box. And then she whispered. Out loud for the first time in weeks. Jamie, what did you find? The shape didn't move. But in her mind, she heard it. The path isn't just through the forest. It's through what's buried. Here is part 5 of The Girl Who Spoke to Owls, A Melody Beyond the Grave. This chapter brings new revelations through forgotten history, a haunted attic, and the growing presence of a darkness that may not be what it seems. Part 5, The Whisper in the Attic. By the time Elsie got home, her boots were soaked and her coat clung to her skin, rain-soaked and heavy. But her hands trembled not from cold but from what she carried. Jamie's bracelet. Dry, warm, impossibly recovered from the same river that had swallowed him whole. She slipped it onto her wrist. It fit perfectly. Just like when they used to take turns wearing it in games pretending it gave them owl senses, the power to hear what others couldn't. Now, maybe it did. Her mother hadn't moved from the sofa. The TV cast flickering blue light onto her sleeping face, mouth half open, a cup of cold tea forgotten on the side table. The house smelled like damp wool and lemon polish. Elsie crept upstairs and placed the wooden box carefully under her bed beside the flutes. But her mind wouldn't settle. The owl feathers. The parchment. The girl in the photo. The whisper in her mind by the river. She needed answers. She needed Jamie. Or someone who knew what he had uncovered. At the top of the staircase stood the narrow attic door. It was rarely opened. Jamie had gone up there once or twice, but only when their father let him, usually to store boxes or look through old books. But she remembered something else now. One evening last year, Jamie had come down with dust in his hair, eyes wide. He'd said, "There's a book up there, not like any I've seen. It's got a map. And a name. Eleonora." She hadn't thought much of it then. Now, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Elsie stood before the attic door, holding her breath. She slowly turned the knob. It creaked open. The wooden ladder unfolded with a groan, and the dry, musty air of the attic drifted down, smelling of old paper, dried flowers, and something else, like metal and moss. She climbed. The attic was dark except for the moonlight slipping through the single circular window. Dust floated in the air like fireflies. Stacks of boxes lined the walls, and an old rocking horse sat abandoned in the corner, its paint flaking like dry skin. She clicked on her torch and swept it across the room. And there it was. A green leather-bound book lying alone on top of a closed trunk. She picked it up gently. The cover had no title, only a burned spiral pressed into the center just like the one carved on the ancient tree. She opened the first page. In neat, faded handwriting, "Eleonora Maeve, Keeper of Owls, Dunsmuir, 1902. Her breath caught. The name. The photo. The same twin spiral symbol inked below it. She flipped through the pages, sketches of forests, owl anatomy, hand-drawn maps with spiral markers, instructions for calling songs, entries like, "Only children can hear the forest's true voice. The owl is not the guide. It is the key. The shadow guards the door to the remembering place." Then she found a map of Dunsmuir. And her heart skipped. In the forest, near the river, the exact location of the spiral clearing was circled. Written beside it in looping script. "Threshold to the listening tree." Suddenly, something rustled behind her. Elsie froze. The attic was supposed to be empty. She turned slowly, holding the torch out. Nothing. Just the rocking horse. But it was no longer in the corner. It had moved. Now it stood beside the trunk where the book had been. And on the horse's saddle Jamie's other bracelet. The one that was buried with him. Elsie backed away, pulse pounding in her ears. Her breath clouded in the attic air. She heard it then. A whisper, not out loud, but inside her mind. "Don't run." She turned the torch to the window. A face stared back at her from the other side of the glass. Not human. Not quite owl. Its eyes were huge, round, and silver. Its face blurred, like fog trying to take shape. She screamed, but no sound came. The attic door slammed shut below her. The light flickered. And the figure vanished. She was alone. She ran to the door, yanked it open, and tumbled down the ladder. Panting. Sweating. The book still clutched in her arms. Downstairs, her mother still hadn't moved. But something in the house had changed. The silence was heavier now, as if listening. That night, Elsie locked her bedroom door. She placed the green book on her desk, the box beneath it, and both flutes by her bed. She didn't sleep. She read. For hours. She read about Eleonora Maeve, Keeper of Owls, Listener of Forests, Daughter of Silence. A girl from 1902 who vanished at age 12. The same age Jamie was when he died. The same age Elsie was now. The last entry in Eleonora's book read, "If I disappear, follow the twin spirals. One leads to memory. The other, to what we lost before time began." Just before dawn, Elsie heard it again. The melody. But not from the forest. From underneath her bed. She dropped to the floor, pressed her ear to the floorboards. 3 notes. Then 4. Then silence. She slowly reached under the bed and pulled out the flutes. One was warm. The other, ice cold. Part 6. The Listening Tree. It was still dark when Elsie left the house. The flutes were strapped across her back inside a canvas pouch. Eleonora's green journal was tucked into her coat. Jamie's bracelet still circled her wrist like a protective band of memory. This time, she didn't wait for the owl to appear. She knew where she was going. To the listening tree. The path was familiar now. through the birch spiral clearing, past the river's mournful bend. The forest, though dense and ancient, somehow seemed to open for her this time, its trees parting like old friends quietly letting her through. Fog lay low, like a blanket of breath. And then she saw it. The tree stood alone in a hollow, surrounded by stones arranged like sunrays. It wasn't tall, but impossibly wide. Its trunk gnarled and split, bark twisted into ridges that looked like braids of hair and coiled wood. Its branches arched toward the sky in elegant sweeps like cathedral arches, and from each branch hung long, silvery threads like cobwebs, or strands of light. At the base, carved deep into the trunk, was the double spiral. Jamie had once drawn this very tree in his sketchbook and called it the heart of the forest. He'd written beside it, "I think this tree can hear what people forget." Elsie stepped into the hollow and instantly felt watched. Not in fear, but in familiarity. She laid the green book beside the trunk and knelt down. From her pouch, she drew both flutes and held them side by side in her hands. And then she played Jamie's melody. 5 notes. Soft. Barely louder than a breath. The wind picked up. Leaves rustled. The silver threads on the tree's branches began to shimmer, like they were vibrating to her tune. And then, the tree replied, not with a sound, but a pulse. A deep, earthy hum from within the roots. The spiral symbol began to glow faintly. The bark cracked, just slightly, and a small slit opened at the base, like a door unlocking. Elsie reached forward and pressed her palm to the glowing spiral. Suddenly she was no longer in the forest. The world blurred. Sound vanished. Her body felt weightless, like air or light. And then, she stood in the same hollow, but in a different time. Children ran laughing through the trees. Their clothes were old-fashioned, boots muddy, faces streaked with joy. Owls perched silently overhead. And near the base of the tree stood Jamie. But not as she remembered him. Older, wearing clothes from another era. He turned and saw her. He smiled. "Elsie," he said. "You made it." She couldn't speak, her voice caught between awe and disbelief. He stepped closer. "I knew you'd hear the melody. You always did." She reached out, but her hand passed through him like mist. "You're not really here," she whispered. He shook his head. "Not yet. Not fully. But I've left pieces. In the tree. In the flutes. In the songs." She clutched the older flute. "Who were they?" she asked, watching the other children. "The lost listeners," he said. "Children who vanished, but didn't die. They stayed where no one could remember them. Hidden in the tree's memories." "Why?" He looked toward the edge of the vision, where a dark shadow hovered. "Because they heard something they weren't supposed to. A song too old. Too deep." She turned to him. "What was it, Jamie? What did you hear?" He didn't answer. His shape began to flicker. "I don't have long. But there's one more place you have to go." "Where?" "Where the shadow waits." The vision dissolved. The children faded. The tree darkened. And Elsie dropped to the forest floor, gasping. When she looked up, the owl stood before her again. But this time, it wasn't alone. Another owl stood beside it. Smaller. Sleeker. The same coloring as Jamie's old sketches. As she stared, the smaller owl turned its head. Just like Jamie used to when confused. "Jamie," she whispered. The owl blinked. And in her mind, his voice answered. "You found me, Els. Now you have to set them all free." Suddenly, the ground shook. The trees groaned. And from the edge of the hollow, the shadow emerged. But this time, it didn't hide. It stepped fully into the light. And it had a face. Not cruel. Not monstrous. Familiar. Too familiar. Elsie's knees weakened. It was Eleanora Maeve. But older. Broken. Torn between human and something else. She stared at Elsie with hollow, silver eyes. "You should not have come," she rasped. The owls flared their wings. Jamie's voice whispered again. "She is what happens when memory turns to shadow." Elsie stood, flutes in hand. The 2 owls rose into the air, circling above her. The listening tree pulsed behind her, silver threads singing. The shadow that had once been Eleonora lifted one arm, and the silver threads began to snap one by one. Each thread snapped was a memory. A voice. A child. Jamie whispered. "Play the first melody, Elsie. The one I never finished." She raised both flutes, one in each hand, and played. The moment the first note rang out, the forest lit from within. The ground glowed. The silver threads reattached. The owl shrieked. Not in fear, but in power. The shadow screamed and covered her face. Fading, burning, dissolving. And Elsie remembered everything. Jamie's laugh. His last song. The whispered secret he'd tried to tell her before the drowning. The truth about the forest, the owls, the flutes, the children, the door. The truth about herself. Part 7, The Door in the Silence. The final note still echoed when the forest exhaled. Not with sound but with light. Silvery beams poured down from the listening tree like threads of moonlight falling through time itself. The forest pulsed like a heartbeat. And the shadow. Eleonora had fallen to her knees, clutching her head. Elsie watched in stunned silence. Eleonora's form flickered in and out, like a projection from another world trying to hold shape. Her dress, once tattered and gray, now shimmered with fragments of the same threads that hung from the tree. "Why did you come back?" Eleonora rasped. "I followed Jamie," Elsie whispered. "I followed the melody." Eleonora's hollow eyes widened. "Just a little. You heard it?" she asked. "Even after the flutes were buried?" Elsie nodded. "I always could. I just didn't know what it meant." A long silence stretched between them, thick with sorrow and things unsaid. The forest was still. Even the owls were silent now. Eleonora lowered her hands. Her voice, when she spoke again, was softer. Not like a monster's. Not like a ghost's. But like a girl who had been lost too long. "The forest is memory," she said. "That's what the tree holds. What the flutes release. It stores what the world forgets. Children. Secrets. Songs. I stayed too long. I listened too deep." She looked up. "Now I can't leave. And neither can they." From the shadows behind her, shapes emerged. Children. Dozens. Faint outlines of boys and girls from different times. Their forms blurred by age and time, as if their names had been erased from the world but still remembered here. One stepped forward. It was Jamie. But not quite. His face shimmered between child and teen, like he was aging and shrinking all at once. He looked at Elsie, eyes full of apology. "I tried to get back to you," he said. "But the tree wouldn't let me go." "Why?" Jamie glanced at Eleonora. "She's the door." But she forgot how to open. Eleonora nodded slowly. "There was once a choice. A promise. I broke it. Now I am the silence." Elsie looked to the listening tree. Its trunk had begun to split. Down the center. A narrow seam now pulsed with light. Like a doorway. She stepped forward. "What's through there?" she asked. Jamie's voice trembled. "It's where the songs go when no one listens. Where the memories wait. And if I go in, some come back," Eleonora said. "Some don't." Elsie's hands clenched around the flutes. "I'm not leaving him here," she said. She stepped toward the tree. The forest whispered again. The owls stirred. Wind circled the clearing like breath. Jamie's form grew clearer. "You don't have to," he said. "But you have to remember everything. Even the pain." The tree's door cracked wider. A deep hum filled the air like 100 voices speaking through roots and leaves and wind. Elsie turned to Eleonora. "You don't have to stay either." Eleonora flinched. "I don't remember who I was." Elsie extended the green leather journal. "You were Eleonora Maeve. Keeper of owls. Listener of forests. And someone who cared enough to leave a way back." Eleonora touched the book with trembling hands. Her face softened. Her eyes blinked. And for a moment, she looked young again. Not a shadow, but a girl. Then Elsie turned. She stepped into the tree. Inside the tree. It wasn't wood. It wasn't light. It was memory. Scenes swirled around her. Snippets of her life, her brother's laughter, her first steps, her parents dancing in the kitchen before life grew hard, children playing, owls circling above them. And deeper still, the memory of Eleonora as a child, carving the first flute with her father, of the song that opened the door, of the moment she forgot how to return. And at the very center, a lake of still water. Jamie stood on the other side. "Elsie," he said, "if you cross, you might forget." She nodded. "I'd rather forget with you than remember without." He smiled. "You always did say the wrong thing just right." She stepped into the water. It was cold. It was warm. It was everything. And the moment she reached him, the forest exploded into light. Back in the hollow, the owl shrieked. Dozens of children gasped, blinking in the new light. And in the center of the hollow, Elsie stood, Jamie beside her. Both alive. Both changed. The flutes lay at their feet. The tree's door had vanished. So had Eleonora. All around them, children wept and laughed and faded. But not into death. Into remembrance. As if somewhere, far away, their names were being spoken again for the first time in decades. Jamie looked at her. "You brought me home." She smiled. And for the first time since he died. So did he. Part 8, The Forest Never Forgets. Morning crept slowly over Dunsmuir, brushing the treetops in gold. Mist clung to the trunks like old memories reluctant to fade. In the hollow, where the listening tree stood sentinel, the silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. Elsie stood there, still and small beneath the vastness of the forest, her fingers loosely intertwined with Jamie's. But this Jamie, he was real now. Not a memory, not a shadow, breathing, solid, alive, and smiling. The tree behind them no longer glowed. The spirals on its bark had dimmed, its threads of silver light now gone. Carried into the sky like whispers returning to the wind. Children's voices no longer echoed from the tree. Because they were free. Some had returned home in ways only their families would understand. Suddenly a name remembered, a toy found, a tear without a reason. Others had left the forest altogether, released like birds too long caged by sorrow. And Eleonora was gone. No shadow, no whisper, only a soft breeze, curling once around the roots of the tree before lifting into the sky. Jamie turned to Elsie. "You brought the forest back to life," he said. She shook her head. "No, the forest was never dead. It just forgot itself." He laughed gently, the sound like something pulled from the deepest part of her heart. Then he grew quiet. "Do you think we'll forget again?" Elsie looked toward the tree, then at the two flutes hanging around her neck. "No," she said. "Because this time, I'll remember for both of us." The walk home felt different. Every step familiar. Every sound, the wind, the birds, the river, carried a new weight. Not heavier, just more true, more alive. The owls flew above them, never too far. One landed on a low branch as they crossed the fence near their backyard. The smaller one, the one with the silver ring around its eye, tilted its head at Jamie. He tilted his back, grinning. "She followed me," he said. Elsie touched her brother's shoulder. "No, she led you home." When they walked into the house, their mother dropped the teacup in her hand. It shattered. She didn't care. She fell to her knees, arms open, and wept as she pulled Jamie close. Their father stood frozen in the doorway, hands trembling, tears streaking his stub-bled face. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, the house was full. Not of things, but of memory. And music. Elsie placed the flutes on Jamie's shelf. Between them, she wedged the green leather journal with the spiral pressed into its cover. And inside its front page, she wrote, "For the next one who hears the owls. Don't be afraid to listen. Don't be afraid to follow." Elsie Maeve. Years passed. Elsie grew. Jamie grew, but the forest never forgot. Children sometimes claimed they heard hoots on stormy nights or soft music from deep within the trees. Some said the tree still sang. Only for those who needed to remember something they'd lost. One autumn morning, Elsie returned to the spiral hollow. This time, not alone. A small girl with bright eyes walked beside her. her daughter. They stopped before the listening tree, which stood quiet and unchanged, its spirals soft with age and moss. "Mom," the girl whispered. "This tree feels like it's listening." Elsie smiled and knelt beside her, handing her a small wooden flute carved from the same wood Jamie's had once been. "Because it is," she said. "And if you ever forget something important, play." The girl brought the flute to her lips and blew a note, off-key and shy. And from far above, an owl answered. The end. The girl who spoke to owls, a melody beyond the grave. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through this wonderful tale. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves mystical tales. And don't forget to subscribe to The Real Furry Stories for more unforgettable stories of love, loss, and the bonds that never die. Until next time, may your lanterns always stay lit. Hearty goodbye.